All right, welcome. Today we are tackling a huge topic, Parkinson's disease. More specifically, we're trying to crack the code of what actually causes it. For so long, it's felt like this giant unsolvable puzzle. But new research is starting to connect some really surprising dots. So let's just jump right in.
So let me ask you something. What could pesticides, your morning cup of coffee, and your own DNA possibly have in common? It kind of sounds like the setup to a weird joke, right? But the answer is, they all play a part in the super complex web of risk for Parkinson's disease. It's this wild idea that shows how our genes and our lives literally collide to shape our health. We're going to unpack all of that today.
10 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's roughly how many people around the world are living with Parkinson's right now. It's a massive global community. And what's really staggering is that it's the fastest growing neurodegenerative disorder out there. That fact alone really lights a fire under researchers to figure out, what's putting people at risk in the first place.
Now, here's something that is just, it's mind-blowing and honestly a little sobering. By the time someone actually gets diagnosed with Parkinson's, more than half of the key brain cells that produce dopamine, they're already gone. It's not like the disease starts with that first tremor you might notice. Nope. The damage has been quietly happening in the background for years, maybe even decades. And that long, silent period is one of the biggest challenges we face in trying to treat or prevent it.
So let's all get on the same page. What exactly is Parkinson's disease? Well, at its heart, it's a disorder where the brain cells that make dopamine start to deteriorate and die off. And dopamine is super important. It's like the oil that keeps our movement running smoothly. When you lose it, you get the motor symptoms we all kind of recognize, like tremors. But it also causes a whole bunch of other non-motor problems. And if you were to look inside the brain, the telltale sign is this protein called alpha-synuclein that starts clumping up into these things called Lewy bodies.
Okay, so that leads to the million-dollar question. Why do these crucial brain cells die? For the longest time, scientists were kind of stuck in this classic nature versus nurture debate. Is it all written in our DNA, or is it caused by something in the world around us? Let's take a look at both sides of that coin.
So, on one hand, you've got your genetic makeup, right? The DNA you inherit from your parents, which can sometimes make you a little more susceptible to developing Parkinson's. And then on the other hand, you have, basically everything else. All the environmental and lifestyle stuff. We're talking about where you live, your job, what you eat, whether you've ever had a bad head injury, the list goes on and on. And for ages, the big question was, which one is the real driver here?
And this chart, this really shows you just how big the mystery is. When scientists crunch all the numbers, they figure that our genetic variation probably accounts for only about a quarter of the total risk. Now, 25% is not nothing, for sure. But look at that other slice. A whopping 75% is, unexplained. That tells you right away that for most people, your DNA isn't your destiny. There has to be something else going on.
So to get a better handle on that genetic piece, scientists have this really cool tool called a polygenic risk score, or PRS for short. The idea is brilliant. Instead of searching for one single Parkinson's gene, which doesn't really exist for most people, it looks at thousands of tiny genetic variations that each add a little bit to your risk. I love this risk bucket analogy. It's like some of us are born with our bucket already half full of risk water, while others start out with just a tiny bit at the bottom. The PRS is just a way of measuring how full your bucket is from the get-go.
All right, so this brings us to the big aha moment. What if we've been asking the wrong question all along? What if it's not genes or environment? What if the real secret is genes and environment? A huge study from 23andMe dug into their massive database to see what happens when you look at how these two things collide. And trust me, this is where the story gets really fascinating.
Check this out. This is the first major bombshell from that study. We know the link between type 2 diabetes and Parkinson's is, it's murky, but they've found that the effect totally depends on your genetic risk score. Get this, if you have a low genetic risk, having diabetes seems to bump up your chances of getting Parkinson's a little bit. But, and this is the crazy part, if you have a high genetic risk, having diabetes was linked to a lower risk. How is that possible? The exact same factor has the complete opposite effect depending on your DNA.
And hold on, because it gets even more counterintuitive when you look at physical activity. For people with low genetic risk, being more active was protective, which is exactly what you'd think, right? Exercise is good for you. But in the group with the highest genetic risk, being more physically active was actually associated with a higher prevalence of Parkinson's. Now, that does not mean exercise is bad. It just shows that this interaction is so much more complicated than we ever imagined.
we're just scratching the surface here. So what's the bottom line here? It's this. That whole nature versus nurture debate is officially outdated. It's not one or the other. The real key, the future of understanding all this, is figuring out the intricate dance between our genes and our environment. A lifestyle factor isn't just universally good or bad for risk. Its effect can be totally different, even flipped on its head, depending on the DNA you're working with. Okay, so keeping that mind-bending idea of interaction in our heads, let's zoom back out. Let's look at the whole messy, complicated web of risk factors that scientists have found links to Parkinson's over the years. You'll see some things seem to push your risk up, and other things, weirdly, seem to pull it down.
This table gives you a pretty good snapshot. So things like being exposed to certain pesticides or having a serious head injury, those have been pretty consistently linked to a higher risk. But then you get these other ones that are linked to a lower risk, like drinking more coffee or having high levels of something called urate in your blood. And of course, there's physical activity, which, as we just saw, is complicated. It's definitely not a simple checklist where you can just tick the boxes. It's way more dynamic than that.
Okay, now we have to talk about the elephant in the room: tobacco use. For decades, study after study has shown this weird statistical link where smokers seem to have a lower risk of developing Parkinson's. But I need to be absolutely crystal clear about this. This is a statistical correlation. It's a clue for scientists to investigate. It is in no way, shape, or form a recommendation to smoke, given the devastating and incredibly well-established health consequences of tobacco.
So, wow, that's a lot of complexity, right? So what does this all mean for you, for us? How do we take all this science and turn it into something useful, something that actually helps us navigate our own potential risk?
Look, the point of all this isn't to create anxiety over things you can't change, like your genes. It's to empower you to focus on the things you can influence. We're talking about the modifiable factors. Maintaining a healthy lifestyle, being cautious with known environmental risks like certain pesticides, and working with your doctor to manage conditions like diabetes. This entire field of research is pushing us toward a future of personalized, preventative medicine.
And that really brings us to the most exciting part, the big question for the future. As we get better and better at untangling this web, not just the individual risk factors, but how they interact with our unique genetic makeup, we open the door to a revolutionary idea. What if we could build a personalized prevention plan for Parkinson's? A plan that could tell someone with a specific genetic profile exactly which lifestyle changes would be most effective for them, potentially stopping this devastating disease before that first neuron is ever lost. The code is complex, no doubt about it, but for the first time it really feels like we're finally beginning to crack it.